Hey team, welcome back to another episode of the Strength Game Podcast. I'm your host, Nick O'Brien, and this is episode number 22. The Strength Game is a weekly podcast dedicated to discussing all things physical culture with the coaches, athletes, iron enthusiasts, and experts deeply embedded in the strength game on both sides of the profession, both as coaches and as competitive athletes. I want to thank those of you who have liked, shared, and subscribed to the show. Your continued support allows us to bring on and highlight more expert level guests, just like our guest today. I also want to thank Cerberus Strength for bringing you this podcast today for free. Owned and operated by active lifters, Cerberus is trusted by the top strength sport athletes and lifters in the world. Cerberus's wide range of products are made by athletes for athletes, truly living up to its moniker, made by the strong for the strong. From sandbags, training gear, and supplements to lifting straps, knee sleeves, and more, Cerberus Strength provides the highest quality strength products on the market, designed and manufactured to help you defeat, destroy, and devour your competition. So if you're in the market for the highest quality strength conditioning gear and equipment, be sure to use promo code strength_game at checkout to receive 10% off your next order at cerberusstrength.com. And in this week's episode, I'm joined by a good friend of mine, Chris Tolzman. Tolzman is an assistant strength conditioning coach at the United States Naval Academy, working directly with the sprint football, women's soccer, and track and field programs. In addition to his work with the varsity teams, Tolzman is also a professor of physical disciplines at the Academy, where he's an instructor for various physical education courses, including boxing, martial arts, and weight training. Prior to his current position, he's also spent time as a strength conditioning coach at Georgetown University, American University, Athletic Performance, Inc. in Millersville, Maryland, and the West Michigan Whitecaps of the Detroit Tigers organization. He began his career as a student volunteer at Eastern Carolina University in the strength conditioning department, and later as an intern at Philippi Sports Institute in Las Vegas. Tolzman is also a competitive Olympic weightlifter where he's been competing since 2013. Like I said, I'm excited to have him on the show today. So with all that said, let's get in the game with Coach Chris Tolzman. What's going on, everybody? I'm excited. I am joined by a good friend of mine. I left back out east, unfortunately. We were actually pretty close to we were essentially neighbors back in the day. So, hey, Chris Tolzman, thanks for coming on today, man.
Nick, I really appreciate it, man. It's an honor. It really is. So it's honestly surreal. So I really appreciate the opportunity to talk to you.
I know. It's great to get a hold of you again, man. So, hey, I want to get right into it. We were talking a little bit briefly, and I know a little bit about your history, but kind of speak on how you first got started in the strength game. Like, what got you into lifting, what kind of sports you played growing up, and then what got you to the point where you've been competitive in Olympic weightlifting?
Okay, so when I first started, as a kid, I played baseball and football. I got into weightlifting or training through my brother, my big brother. He actually got me into the gym. He said I was out of shape and I was weak and, just like a big brother does. So he ended up taking me underneath his wing and showing me the ropes. I mean, we trained like bodybuilders, but honestly, at that age, probably was good for me to gain some kind of muscle mass, decrease the large amount of fats that I had residing in my body, which I still do. But either way, that's how I got started. My brother actually got me into it. In terms of strength conditioning, I found out about strength conditioning while I was at East Carolina in undergrad. And I talked to a couple buddies who were in the same major as me, and they mentioned volunteering with the strength conditioning department. And I thought that was a really great opportunity and idea. So I at least wanted to see what it was about. So I started volunteering and I really enjoyed it. Like everything about it was so much fun, like everything. So being part of the team was something that I'd really forgotten about, honestly, since playing in high school, because I never really played in college. So that opportunity really opened my eyes, and that ended up leading into me getting an internship in Las Vegas, because my brother was actually living in Las Vegas at Philippi Sports Institute. So it was with Mark Philippi, the old American strongman, He opened up his business after leaving UNLV, and I saw it on a Men's Health magazine, and I'm like, oh wow, there's a top 10 gyms in the country. One in Las Vegas. My brother lives in Las Vegas, so I reached out to him and actually got an opportunity to intern with him, which was an awesome opportunity. I learned so much over there, and just even being able to see Coach Philippi lift was inspiring. Like watching this guy like clean a thick bar, and it felt like it had like 315, 365. It had a lot of 45s on it. You know what I mean? Like I want to say 405, but heck if I know. But I'm just like, this is insane, you know? But it had really good clients, like high school, professional. We even did Gen Pop, so general population, and that was awesome as well. But those are really the first two opportunities, and that ended up leading into Detroit Tigers. So the Detroit Tigers, they had the seasonal positions, and actually was gotten an interview because they saw on my resume that I had Philippi Sports Institute, and he heard Mark Philippi speak at a Swiss conference and said I was awestruck by how smart this guy was, you know. So I got an interview with Chris Walters with the Detroit Tigers, and they offered me the position. I took it. So I went to spring training, did that whole deal with both the big league and the minor league. Got assigned to the West Michigan Whitecaps in Grand Rapids, Michigan. I didn't fulfill the entire season. I ended up getting a job offer closer to my wife, and I ended up taking it. So, but I enjoyed it. I mean, there was a lot on the road. The first time I've ever had to like live with a host family, which I thought that was the strangest thing in the world. But you do what you got to do, you know. And I'll never forget those times, honestly. Like I was 22, 23, and I had low A ball. So it was a bunch of guys who were my age, you know, and they enjoyed themselves as much as we did back when we were 23. So it was a really good environment because it was a lot of fun.
That's awesome. Yeah, those first like few experiences that you get like in the profession when you're kind of like coming into it yourself and learning about it, those ones have always stuck with me. And you definitely bounced around a lot more because you went from North Carolina all the way to Vegas, all the way to Detroit. So,
oh, it was a lot of driving. My poor dad's Ford Ranger, man, that thing. When he got rid of that thing, I was so mad at him because I had driven to Las Vegas like down and back. I think I actually drove out there as well with my brother whenever we moved him out there, and then I drove down to Lakeland, Florida. You know, and then I drove all the way up to Michigan in that truck, back to Maryland, and I was like, man, I spent a lot of time in that truck, you know. So no, I was definitely bouncing around. Definitely bouncing.
That truck deserves an award too.
Even whenever I had it at East Carolina, it got a bullet hole in it. I don't even know how it got shot, but my dad's like, Chris, is this a bullet hole inside? I'm like, oh wow, Dad, I had no idea. I'm so sorry. Still don't know who did it.
My old car definitely took a beating, like driving back and forth from internships, like when I first started. So I know the feeling, not that far, but just the amount of miles you put on that thing is brutal when you're first coming up. But you definitely learn a lot from those experiences, and that's cool to kind of see. You went professional level, you went collegiate level, you went private sector, so you got a little taste of everything. And I know it's probably served you well, like in your position. I know now it's a little bit different compared to most people's collegiate like coaching jobs, because you're at the academy, and even all the service academies do it a little bit different. Can you kind of explain your current position, like what the structure it is? Because not in addition to like you coaching varsity sports and those athletes, you also teach some courses like in physical disciplines. So can you explain like how that structure works for you?
Absolutely. So this is by far the most unique position that I think honestly is in the country, like other than all the other service academies that offer a strength conditioning / PE instructor title. So my title is Professor of Physical Disciplines. I'm essentially a PE instructor, as well as being the assistant strength and conditioning coach for the assigned teams that I have. From a PE side, it's really, really interesting because I'm teaching combatives and that's going to be plebe boxing and martial arts. And we use the Marine Corps martial arts program, the MIPMAP program, during their junior year here at the Academy. And then on top of it, I also teach weight training, which is essentially a senior elective course that they take if they're interested in learning the Olympic lifts. So we teach them snatch and clean and jerk. And then also personal conditioning, which is a required course for the sophomores to essentially try to teach them how to train, and do that in the most extensive, comprehensive way we can in the 16 weeks we have during that semester.
Yeah, that's cool to hear. I didn't realize that you had one of the, like an Olympic level course, and to hear kind of how the different courses are already built into the program for all the midshipmen. When you go through, like, per year, they have to take this course. It's interesting to kind of see how it stacks up on top of each other, and then they get to take those electives.
It's really interesting. From their plebe year, they're going to have to experience some swimming. They're required to do swimming every year except their senior year. From the other aspect, the combatives aspect, they do wrestling and boxing their plebe year. They do personal conditioning their youngster year, their sophomore year. Their second class year, their junior year, they have to take martial arts. That's their other combatives that they have to do. And that's both stand up, where we teach them skills, essentially self-defense skills, stand up wise, and also jujitsu. That's the ground base. So for martial arts, we do 8 weeks stand up, 8 weeks jujitsu, and we flip flop those two sections because they're pretty big classes. I mean, you have to get 1,000 mids through martial arts, so the classes get pretty big, but we offer so many classes, and luckily we have a lot of combatives instructors that'll help out. But it's a well-oiled machine, no doubt.
That's cool. What about like with the curriculum and stuff, like the structure and the format of how you guys go through? Is there a grading process, or is it kind of just completion, or do you have a say in how some of that stuff is constructed? Because obviously when people that don't know, for a service academy, coaching staff and all that stuff, you work for the Navy at that point. You're a contractor. They don't really give a shit what your opinion is. So when it comes to stuff like that, like, how much of a say do you kind of have in kind of constructing that curriculum, or even how you go about coaching and teaching some of those things?
Yeah, I mean, with the senior elective classes, you have a little bit more autonomy. So whenever I'm doing weight training with the seniors, I teach them very, very similar to the way I teach my athletes. So you have a lot of autonomy to sort of create the curriculum around what your beliefs are. With plebe boxing, it's a little bit more structured. That's something that's been going on since the head boxing coach, Coach McNally's been here since the 80s. So we teach the hook, we teach the jab, we teach the cross, and we teach how to defend those. So first class, we always teach like stance and footwork and the jab. And then we start introducing how to defend the jab with, catching a jab or slipping it. And then we teach the cross the next class, and then we teach the hook the next class and how to defend those. But every class ends with the sparring session, so they have to do 2 1-minute rounds. And I think that's by far one of the most interesting classes that you do, because you can literally wake up at second period, 9 o'clock in the morning, probably around 9:20, 9:30. You're going to see kids get bloodied up, and they actually go at it. And it is, some of it's like not the greatest boxing skills, because obviously they're fighting, but you see a lot of effort. You see a lot of people go hard because they understand, like, this is for a grade. So yeah, we do grade those kids, both in the boxing, they do it in the wrestling, in the martial arts. The stand-up's more skills-based. So we ask them to show me, counter to a headlock, counter to a bear hug, counter to a rear choke, show me how to do a figure 4 choke. And we'll grade that subjectively. And then also we'll grade them in jiu-jitsu, where they roll. So they roll for X amount of minutes. And I've seen mids get choked out like 3 times in a row, 8 o'clock in the morning. And then you give them a grade and tell them have a good day. And you're just thinking, man, that's not the way you want to start your Monday, getting choked out. But he gave us backup. So I can't really, feel too bad for him, because we've been trying to tell these kids, hey, when you're in a position of dominance, like, go for it. If you're in a position, like if you're in someone's guard, you need to get out of that guard. So we try to teach them as much as we can to get them comfortable, being in those positions and knowing what you're supposed to be doing. But obviously, when the bell rings in boxing, or when we tell them to start fighting and the ground portion, sometimes technique can go out the window, and you're just sort of trying to survive. So it is really interesting. But I mean, from a curriculum standpoint, not much has been changed as far as an instructor. We have curriculum coordinators who sort of create the curriculum for each course. They send out a syllabus. We go through it as instructors, as lead instructors, and then as assistant instructors, you don't really have to. You can sort of learn it as you assist. But it's been a really, really thorough, comprehensive format, the way they do it. It's been a lot of fun, to be completely honest. It's honestly, when I first started, I felt like I was learning so much, from jujitsu, like how to put somebody in an arm bar, how to put somebody in a side choke, bend arm bars. Like, there was just so many things that I was just like, man, I never, it actually makes me want to do jujitsu. So, but in terms of curriculum, sorry for getting off point. In terms of curriculum, no, there isn't that much with those mandatory prerequisite courses that we have a lot of say. So obviously we can teach it differently, with different cues, just like we would with the Olympic lifts, or the strength lifts. But it's all dependent upon the lead instructor. Pretty much.
That's cool. Yeah, that's a wild way to start off your morning for sure. But
I've seen it many times, honestly. I've seen it many times.
In your position in that seat, it's probably pretty amusing too. But hey, lesson learned right away. And honestly, for them, like, I mean, you knowing that even with some of the varsity athletes, well, everybody that in your course, like, there's the bigger picture for them is, I mean, they're preparing for what could be, and they could be in a position where they're in a foreign war for whatever reason. And so I mean, it's important for them to be able to turn it on and turn it off. And it's an interesting concept to see those lessons learned kind of applied to the rest of their studies. And it's cool to be a part of that process and see, like, be very well-rounded with how you coach them in different courses, so that they can kind of touch on a little bit of everything and just be well-rounded individuals. And then for your athletes, the same thing, be well-rounded athletes. So I know with your course, like, you're pretty heavily involved yourself in weightlifting. You've been training that way for a number of years now, and you've competed. With your familiarity with those movements and, like, your influence for that, why do you kind of use weightlifting movements to drive your team programming? Like, why are you so heavily kind of involved with those sort of movements? And what do you think is the kind of benefit that you see from a sports performance standpoint? And then if there are any drawbacks to it?
Oh yeah. I mean, obviously I think the biggest drawback, and I wouldn't call it a drawback because I think it's just part of the deal, it's coaching intensive, so you're going to have to spend time watching reps and correcting technique, correcting positions. And I don't think it's a drawback, but it's just you have to be patient. I think a lot of times, especially nowadays, everybody wants it now, but I think over time, the athletes really appreciate the process. They understand that they're not going to be able to clean or snatch X, Y, or Z. It's going to take time to get there. And I think that's what drives them daily to come in here and try to hit the right positions. Now, obviously, you are going to get, your handful of athletes who just sort of go through the motions, but hopefully over time, with them seeing progress, they're going to start buying into it more. In terms of why I think it's important, is that it checks a lot of boxes, so from when you look at Doc Stone's earlier books, I think it's Weightlifting, a Scientific Approach. He talks about training economy, and Jim Wendler talks about it too, about doing big movements that sort of check a lot of boxes. And that way you don't have to do so much more afterwards. And here at the Naval Academy, I think training economy really reigns supreme, because there are certain instances where we literally have 30 minutes to train a team in a lunch block. So when you're thinking about it, like I can't spend a ton of time doing, a ton of exercises, just because when you look at it, you're going to have to pick the exercises that mean the most to you. So you have to take out a lot of fluff. And I think this place has really done a good job and really challenged me of looking at what I believe in, what I want to get out of these athletes, and use that notion to sort of streamline what I think is important, and I think the weightlifting movements really check a lot of those boxes off. So you think of, rate of force production, force absorption, those things, they're going to be able to do a lot of those things through different loading schemes or different positions that are just going to really have a lot more effect than, some of the other things that you can do. And then you got to also consider the equipment that we have, so when we talk about equipment, we have, for this weight room in Wesley Brown, we have 27 racks. And they essentially have a men's and women's barbell, and they have bumpers, and some change plates, some fractional plates. But in terms of dumbbells, we don't really have enough for me to sort of use them because our teams are so large. So it sort of creates not a vacuum, but a bottleneck of what exercise selections you can use. So calisthenics and barbell movements are probably going to be the driving forces towards the program design that I use here at the Naval Academy, honestly.
Yeah, timing and equipment, and like what you have available. Those are two big pieces that most people, for whatever reason, like avoid first. And that's really the driving force behind it. Like you can say, like, I have a sport and needs analysis, they need to do this and this and this. Yeah, but the way you go about doing it, if I want to do snatches, or if I want to do power cleans and I don't have a bar, I can't do it. That's just what it is.
Yeah.
So like the
Absolutely.
facility and timing, that drives your decision of what you do. And honestly, it's probably the best approach you can take. And I know one of the other guys you work with, like Nick Alloy over at Navy, he said the exact same thing too. He's like it forces you to just stick to the meat and potatoes and take out the fluff. And if it's not important, then it doesn't go in the program, because I don't have, I have no time to waste. They're in and out. That's what it is.
Yeah. I mean, and honestly, I was talking to the men's soccer head coach and talking about how these constraints here at the academy they're challenging, but I think they've sort of shed a lot of light on what works and what doesn't, and if let's say I was to go somewhere else where I had more time, I don't know how much more I would add. I might, maybe do more work in the sprinting or the plyos or the med ball throws and use that extra time towards that. But I don't know if I would do extra work in the weight room, to be completely honest, but
yeah,
that's just personal opinion, to be completely honest.
No, I would agree. And I mean, I try to look back at my own programs, and I mean, if you look back at your program and you don't kind of shake your head and just wonder what the hell you were thinking, then like you should probably take a look and reevaluate. But the one thing I try to do is just try to find ways to stop overcomplicating it or making it more than it is. At the end of the day, it's fucking weightlifting. Like we know what it is. So like, I get it. You can make it as complicated as you want. You can make it as sexy and fancy as you want. But the best thing about like the service academy and that sort of mindset that you have, that maybe you're kind of forced to be in, is you have to be really good at the basics, and you have to build a foundation, and you're pressed for time. You might be pressed for resources. And honestly, at the end of the day, they're not even student athletes. They're military student athletes. So their priorities are kind of all over the place.
I'm telling you, you hit the nail on the head, because there's been sessions that you miss because kids need EI or extra instruction in a certain class with the professor who's only available at a certain time. Afternoons, you can lose a team because they have to do practice parade, so they actually have to practice the parades that they do and the march-ons and stuff that they'll do in front of the public. So, it's definitely different. You definitely lose some sessions that you may have planned for. You sort of just need to pick back up. But you're right. Absolutely. You're absolutely right. I mean, in that same scenario, to be completely honest, I don't use that many variations as well. The variation might be driven by sets and reps and loading schemes, but it isn't too fancy by any means. And I think you could see a lot of people attain a lot of mastery in these lifts because they don't really change much, but they get so many reps at it that you can see them sort of get aha moments, where kids before had a hard time snatching. And then the next year comes around after their summer cruises, and then they come back and he's snatching. It looked like he's been, practicing. And now I'm like, man, Cole, have you been practicing? And he's like, no, I actually haven't touched a barbell in 3 months. And I'm like, well, that's a terrible thing to hear, but you look great, man. He's like, I was like, what's the difference? He's like, I don't know. It just feels natural. I'm like, it looks a lot more natural. So it's really, really awesome to see that progression from the plebe, their freshman year to their senior first year. You could see a lot of progress in those 4 years, Buff, like no doubt.
Yeah, that's a great point. And I think like the process of it, and especially with all the things that go on, like being at the service academy, being a plebe, being a midshipman there, like everything is constantly changing. You're pulled in so many directions. So for you to have kind of be consistent with how you like choose your exercises and everything, they can see the process. And I know weightlifting, especially, like I don't compete in it, but like just doing the movements and everything, it gets boring sometimes, honestly. Like, I mean, because I picked strongman, I picked Highland Games because I can change. I can go throw outside. I can go, all right, I don't want to do sandbag today. All right, dump that. I'll pick up the keg. All right, I'll go do something else. Like there's so much variety because I guess I just have OCD and like, or I have ADHD and I just want to do stuff. But for them, like to be consistent with the lifts and see like daily incremental improvements, like I know that drives them to be successful, and that's important to them because honestly everything else that they're doing is pretty stressful. So to have something where they can build on and then like have those like little incremental like boosts of confidence, that's probably huge.
Oh, it's massive, and they really look forward to it, even though it may not change much. I remember one athlete talking about how excited he was to lift, and I'm like, Nick, like we do this lift all the time, well, how could he be really excited about, snatching, back squatting, push pressing? He's like, I mean, typically I PR like once a phase. So like, you never know, and typically it happens in week 3 where we're really pushing the intensity. But when he said that, it just sort of dawned on me that, it is fun. It's fun for them too. And weightlifting, like you said, weightlifting is snatch and clean and jerk, and I think honestly for me, being the sort of perfectionist that I like to think that I am, that's what drew me into it. So, the bars feels different every day depending upon fatigue, and readiness. So it's very, very interesting to see how your body tries to snatch or clean and jerk depending upon that fatigue, depending upon load. But I've always enjoyed the perfectionist side of making sure I'm hitting the right positions. Now, obviously, I'm not the greatest weightlifter, and those who've seen a lot more reps can definitely pick out some tendencies or some problems that I have within my technique. But I'm more than happy to work on, and I think that's what drew me into it the most whenever I started weightlifting. Because when I started, it was really like I was just a fake power lifter, trying to drive up my squat, bench, and deadlift, but I was too scared to compete, and then I was trying to pull 600. That was my biggest goal, and I finally hit it, and I was like depressed. I was like, well, what do I do now? So I'd been weightlifting, like dabbling in it, and I only did it because I wanted to learn how to teach it better, because I thought, well, if I understand it better, it'd be easier for me to talk them through it, So I just decided to sort of start doing weightlifting. and it just sort of came, organically in a way. And once I started snatching, because I like to think that I'm a snatch specialist, but a good friend of mine, Alex Lee, says there's no way you're clean as by and far way beyond your snatch. You're a way better cleaner than you are a snatcher, but still, like, I'm a snatch specialist. When I did the first snatch and I jumped 5 feet forward and I still received the bar at 135, man, it's just something special about that,
I enjoy watching you do those. It's a great fun, but you put up some weight. Hey, but that really leads into like a perfect transition into what I wanted to talk about, which was like your like coach's own personal training and like what they do in their own time. Like oftentimes it sometimes drives what they program for their athletes, but like you said, you kind of picked it up just to kind of be able to teach your athletes even more. Is it good to only coach like what you know or train personally, or is it inherently bad to coach your athletes in something that you don't do or don't understand?
That's a good question. I mean, I think, in my opinion, it's a no-brainer. Like, you should be coaching what you know. I don't think you should be overextending yourself, because that just sort of leads me to think that maybe there's a possibility that you're missing some spots about the coaching points of different, exercises. So in a way, you should definitely coach what what you do. I mean, I think what you repeatedly do is something that you're definitely going to have a better, vaster knowledge on that area, but that doesn't mean that you can't try things out, so, if you're doing a movement session and you want to know what tempo runs are like, then go run. If you want to do maximal aerobic speed intervals, then do them, and I think those are the things that sort of I find myself leaning more towards now, where I'm becoming more interested in at the age of 35. I don't know why I've decided now I wanted to start actually moving, and like running and doing all this stuff, like more athleticism. But it's been very interesting at the body weight that I am. I mean, I'm probably terrible technique. That's why I'm having some stiffness in my lower legs whenever I'm running. My feet are killing me. Maybe I'm just overweight and out of shape. But either way, it's been good for me. It's a really, really good learning process, and I do think it's important, though, that you coach what you do know. I think you're going to have more concise information that you can give to the athlete that can be directly applied to what they're doing. I think once you start putting in exercise that you really haven't really tried before, that's when you might be doing a little bit more guesswork than you need to. Just stick to what you know and just work it like crazy. And then you will eventually see results. They're not going to come overnight, but you will definitely see results.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. I think the one thing that I would say too is like coach what you know, but I think some people pigeonhole themselves to what they do know. And like they paint themselves into a corner of, hey, I'm a young coach. I love weightlifting. My guys are going to weightlift. It's like,
right.
Okay, well, you should probably expand yourself, because to say that they're only going to do this is not the same. They're trying to get better at a sport. You're trying to train a sport with another sport. So
Right.
there's definitely open up to more interpretation, but I couldn't agree more that you need to make sure that you understand what you're doing before you start programming it for someone else, especially for the athletes.
Even from a lifting and a training standpoint, like, you should know what it's like to push yourself. You should know what it's like to get underneath the barbell and to have a heavy weight on your back or on your front rack, on your shoulders, and do exactly what you're expecting them to do. Because I think there's a lot that goes into it. And I think that athletes buy into it more knowing that you've been there, and maybe I haven't necessarily been there as much with like the midshipman side here, but I know what it's like to go for a 10 RM. I know what it's like to go for a heavy double or a heavy triple. And I think that sort of allows you to look at things differently too, so I think it's imperative that you have to train, You definitely need to get underneath the bar or put it in your hands. And I think the strength sports actually allow you to be more, how can I say, I guess more devoted to it. You take it seriously because you might have a competition coming up, and you're sort of competing against yourself in a way. But I mean, when you look at those other people who are in your weight class, I mean, you're definitely going to try to compete against them, but I think that's what it's important. It's important to pick a strength sport and try to train for it. I think you learn a lot from yourself about doing that.
Yeah, I love that. I mean, I remember back like in the Georgetown days and kind of going on the point of you have to know what you're programming and what it feels like before you can actually give it to an athlete, and forcing all of us to do the conditioning test for our sport. It's like, if you can't do that, don't even think about giving it to your sport.
Right.
That's huge, because it gives you some stake in it, and it gives you some buy-in with the athletes, because like you said, you're 35, you can't go to the Naval Academy.
Right.
So that experience is kind of gone, and there's only so much that you'll be able to kind of like pick up on things and get involved as much as possible. And there'll still be a few people at the end of the day be like, oh, well, you don't know what I'm going through. It was like, well, I've done everything I possibly can to at least understand what you're doing. So like, explain it to me. But that's why it's awesome to like talk to more people that are involved in strength sports and everything, because you're doing as much as you can to relate to them as much as possible. And you and me are never going to play women's soccer, which just, we can't. So,
and unless we're like ladybugs, like the old ladybugs, maybe with Rodney Dangerfield, but no, you're right. To make it even more clear, like I can sort of talk to these track athletes that I have, like track is one of my teams, and I can see them in different phases. And if they're running, I'll always ask, like, how'd you feel? Some of them ran a PR. That's great. It's even better because I know, we didn't taper for that meet, and if you ran a PR without a taper, just imagine if we did taper, in the same context too, if we're doing a TENS phase, a strength endurance block, and I know that their legs are going to have so much fatigue in them, and they run 95% of their PR, like, just imagine when we remove all this fatigue out of your legs, you're going to be flying, So to me, it's all in context as well, and I can relate to them by saying, like, if I'm doing a TENS block and I have tired legs, but I'm able to hit, 90 to 95% of my all-time PR, like I'm actually happy. I'm actually thinking, once we go into my fives block, or once I start decreasing some of this volume, I think I'm going to be able to hit some good numbers, and I think training for stuff allows you to sort of make those assumptions in a way. And I don't want to call them assumptions, because I know what assuming means or what assuming does, but I think being able to relate to them in that context allows them to sort of understand even more, furthermore, like, oh yeah, I think you're actually right. Like, my legs are feeling really tired, and I did run really fast. So I don't think, a lot of times they're so hard on themselves here, that it's good for you as a coach to remind them, like, hey, I think you're well on your way. It's just, it didn't happen today, but honestly, when you look at it, like I was telling a high jumper, you should probably have percentages of your best high jump, and he was like, wow, I never really thought about like looking at it in that perspective. And I was like, yeah, I mean, why wouldn't you? Like, it just allows you to be a little bit more thorough in evaluating where you are, and where you want to go. So I think it does help out a lot, though. I really
definitely. Yeah, that's one thing that, like, the percentages, I took that to heart when I started throwing for Highland Games, and I forget who I heard it from, but they were talking about like minimums. So yeah, like you're not always going to throw your best. You're not always going to lift the most on a certain day. There's so many factors that come into play, but if you can raise your minimum and you can get more consistent and you can kind of raise the bar to that, so that this is the threshold. I know that if I'm having like a dog shit day and it's below that minimum, then we really have a problem. But I know that now, if my threshold gets a little bit higher, my opportunity to just launch one is increased from there. And
Right.
and yeah, we in our position, like we don't want to assume anything, but from all the athletes we see, all the kind of data we collect, whether informal, subjective, it doesn't matter. We see trends, and we start to kind of see indicators of when someone's going to pop off a PR, or when someone's like having a bad day, whatever it ends up being. And all that is valuable information that I think most people don't really take into consideration. And it's hard to quantify, but at the end of the day, that's really the art of what we do. And it makes a big difference to the athletes for sure.
Yeah, I think you're allowed to connect the dots, and I agree wholeheartedly about minimums. I remember Alex Lee always talking about Donnie Schenkel, raise your minimums. And even in weightlifting, like you want to increase your minimums because there will be a day where you're going to be able to PR, and as your minimums increase, your opportunities to PR increases to me. So I agree. I mean, I think that was a really good point. I haven't heard somebody talk about minimums in a while, so it's nice to hear that word, minimums.
Oh yeah, I still have my green Donnie Schenkel plates.
Oh yeah.
Oh yeah, from back in the Salisbury days there. And Andy and I painted them just so we could make sure that we could steal them whenever we want. You always got to walk around and have some Donnie Schenkel in you and just take someone's greens right off their bar.
Oh man. Jeez.
Hey, so when looking at like weightlifting for someone that wants to either get better, like get involved in it, or kind of improve and bring that into their toolbox as a coach, like where do you kind of start with little or no experience trying to get involved in those movements? And is there what are like some non-negotiables for a coach who wants to implement those movements into a program for their teams?
Well, obviously, you got to start with the end in mind. So think about the receiving positions of those lifts. So can they be in a good position on a standing press? Can they get full lockout? Are their lats tight, or is their pec tight? Will they be able to have the bar directly, over their center of mass? In terms of the snatch, can they do an effective overhead squat? Same thing with your front squats for the clean. I mean, I think those are mandatories. Even from a hinging aspect, can you snatch grip RDL? Because that's a greater range of motion than clean grip RDL. If you can do those things, I think you're well on your way. And I think you just drive those things like crazy. I think you just continuously train those positions and make sure that you do it obviously with great posture, great technique. And look at it from a more of a qualitative lens and a quantitative lens. I think that's what happens when you get into a strength sport. Is you're just hell bent on adding weight onto the bar. But if you're doing it with sloppy technique, that the carryover isn't going to be there nearly as much as if you just took a couple kilos off the bar and actually did it right, But I think like if you can snatch grip deadlift, you're well on your way, because if you can snatch grip deadlift, typically you should be able to clean grip deadlift. So, and I think that's what USA Weightlifting now does. I think they have a pretty good process to sort of screen people, for the lifts, and overhead squat, front squat, standing press, snatch grip deadlift. Those are things that I think are going to definitely make you put you in a better place for the lifts. Obviously you can definitely do the RDLs before the deadlifts because that's a little bit more limited range of motion, and easier to achieve, especially if you're really inflexible. But I think eventually after you get to an RDL, eventually trying to start pulling from the deck over time, could be months. That kind of progress is going to help you out a lot, but drilling positions as well, and I think positions are a little bit different just because position 2 and position 3 are a little different because it's below the knee in the deck, but position 1, making sure that you're finishing into position 1, you're not extending your knees. Like when we're doing RDLs, and I see a lot of kids who go into position 1, they get the bar to a really good position 2, then they come back into 1, but their knees are straight. I think it sort of drives bad habits, in some ways. Somehow I want them to come back into a really good position 1 where they can go right into a snatch or clean from that position. That way we can have some more carryover, I think it has better carryover and they're able to learn the lifts a little bit easier, but I would say those, if you're looking to get into them, stick with the strength lifts. Obviously, you can definitely, once you get really good at the overhead squat, I think that's going to be the hardest one for a lot of people. Then you can start doing some power snatching, to an overhead squat, some power cleans from position one, hang power clean from position one to an overhead squat. And to a front squat. And I think that's going to sort of help drive your technique, but you just got to play the slow game. You just got to be very patient.
Yeah. The carryover is huge. And I think having a systematic approach to it, I think USAW does it well. I know how you teach weightlifting for your athletes and the plebes. Like there's a process to it, and
Absolutely.
And it building on each other, I think, only kind of drives home the point of the importance of the positions and the posture of it. And then they can actually have more success and do it properly and more safely when you have it all laid out. Okay, so with putting any exercises in your program and stuff, like when you're looking at adding something in, like, are there any like non-negotiables or anything that you like really need to focus on before something goes into your program? And especially like for someone that, like we said, doesn't really understand like a certain exercise or anything, like when you're choosing to implement these into a program and you're in periodization, like what are your non-negotiables for putting that in?
Okay. So a lot of it, I'll usually start with principles, right? So scientific principles, can we overload it? Is it specific? Does it apply to our equipment and our like roster sizes that we have? The other things I look at is training considerations like relative strength. I do think you need to earn the right to do complex movements. You do need to earn the right to do more advanced methods of strength training. So that's going to be through relative strength, and training age. Then you have technical competency. How well are you grasping some of the concept that we're presenting to you through the training program? And then obviously like your training principles that you have your own beliefs, so continuums like simple to complex, easy to hard, those are the things that I think need to always be addressed. Then you have quality over quantity, those are beliefs, but that doesn't necessarily mean towards exercise selection. But yeah, there's definitely some principles that need to, be checked off before I add it in, and with the constraints of the equipment, the room, how many people are going to be using the room, that all plays into that selection process as well.
Yeah, that's great to hear. So seeing as you teach a lot of the same principles, and you teach a lot of, you can call it a class, you can call it a class block if you want, since it is, some of them are in the physical education and some of them are sports performance for their varsity sport. Are there any things that you kind of change, or does the tempo change, or the speed at which you kind of like progress movements or anything differ between your varsity sport athletes and then the ones that are in the physical discipline classes and stuff like that?
Obviously load's going to be definitely dictated. The athletes are going to be, their expectations sort of push themselves with good technique. With the weight training classes, we only make them do, I want to say like 25 kilos or 20 kilos on the snatching and the clean and jerk. So we have some, 2.5 kilo training plates that they use to effectively show that they can pull from the deck with Olympic plates on, and get to the right positions and do a full snatch and as a clean and jerk. But in terms of tempo and stuff, I really don't change it too much in terms of classes. The way I teach is literally the way I teach. I use some feeder exercises to get them to understand the concept of bar contact and the body to bar contact that's being made when you're pulling it anywhere past position one. So a lot of that's like hit and catch from John North, but it's not nearly as aggressive because I know John North has like an insane body to bar contact. But I do think it's good to get them to know that the bar and the body should meet together at position one before it goes up, and getting them in the right position, and then having them sort of bring the bar away, relax their lats, and then bring the bar in, like contract their lats into position one. And once that bar hits position one, they push their feet down into the deck as hard as they can, and they receive the bar in the appropriate positions that they need to be in, either the overhead squat or the front squat position. Sort of helps drive that idea of bar contact. Like I said, some people envy the bar, they just want the bar contact. Other people, they don't necessarily understand it. And I think it's like trying to slow it down for them and piece it together, like a part whole approach.
Right. It's just a crazy concept from the collegiate setting, like separately, like outside of a service academy, everybody that you kind of come in contact with, all your athletes, they're there to participate in a sport. So everything they do in the weight room is driven towards performance and like success on the field. So it's interesting to kind of hear your approach and how you have to tailor what you do, but really there's not a lot that changes between the same sort of collegiate athletes, because they're Division I athletes that you work with. But then on the flip side, you've got some that might hate physical education and training, some that might, whatever sort of course you're teaching, that they might hate jujitsu, they might hate boxing, or they might love it. Like it's a completely different kind of approach that you have to take.
It is actually, you're right. Again, I've had people take weight training and, they told me their whole goal was to get into CrossFit, and they were too afraid to go to the CrossFit blue and gold box. And they wanted to get better at the Olympic lifts. Soon enough, over time, you see, that same student start wearing Metcons, and she's bearing her snatches, and she's becoming more and more confident over 16 weeks. And then at the end of the class, she's, at the end of the semester, she says, I asked her, like, hey, did you ever go to CrossFit blue and gold? And they're like, oh yeah, I started like a couple weeks ago. And she was thanking me, like, thank you so much for helping me out with this Olympic weightlifting technique. I'm like, oh, that's my job. Like, you don't have to thank me. Like, it was my pleasure. But then again, you have some people who, they didn't even sign up for that class. I know a lot of times whenever we do our first class, I would typically say, like, some of you, like, really tried, like, you did everything in your power to get this class. Some of you have no idea why you're in this class right now, because they essentially, all the electives that they wanted, kayaking, volleyball, rock wall, rock climbing, all those classes were full, and they were just like, we'll throw you in weight training. Why not? And here they are doing overhead squats day one. And I know I've seen it before, and I've seen it a million times, where they just have this look in their eye, like, I can't believe I have to do this class, But eventually, a lot of them, they like I don't know, maybe it's because I just like say some of the most outlandish things, or make some analogies that are just ridiculous, but a lot of them enjoy it by the end of it, and I think maybe it's just because, again, it's part of the process where they see where they started and they see where they are now. And they totally are bought into that, but it's so funny how you have like student athletes come in and they're just like so focused, then you have like Joe Mid come in and he's like, I just got to get through this class. Just got to get through this 30 to 50 minute course. And typically our PE classes are going to be 30 minutes so we can get them to change and get them back into wherever they need to go on the yard, so I'm like, that's 30 minutes of your week. Like, that's all you got to give me, 30 minutes, and I'll make it really dense. Like, they go back and forth with triples with the barbell. And we just keep on going. Sometimes they're sweating, especially if it's hot in this weight room, they're sweating their butts off, which I don't think they really like, because they have to get it back into uniform all sweaty and they complain about it. But it's like, hey, you got better at snatch today. Like, that's something to be proud of, You're going to stink all day, but whatever.
Hey, it's a decent trade-off.
Absolutely. That's what I thought. I mean, every time I talk to them, I'm like, it's a great day to snatch. It's a great day to overhead squat today, And I mean, they can't say anything because I do everything. Like I demo everything, so like I don't use the assistant instructors. Like I do everything. And I mean, my fat buddy's breathing hard. Even with this mask on, like I'm like, oh God, like I'm going to pass out. But I'm still trying to bury those snatches as hard as I can, And I think it catches their eye. If I introduce the Olympic lifts very first day of class and I just throw on, I mean, even if it's 40 kilos cold for them, they're like, oh my God, that guy just did 2 big green plates, But to me, it's like, oh, come on, I should be able to hit 60, cold. I should be able to hit 80 cold, maybe, Man, 100 cold, that'd be sweet. But either way, you sort of catch their eye with how precise you are, how much aggression there is in the lifts, because I do think that's something that you can definitely see just by a bystander can watch it. My father-in-law watches me compete and he's like, wow, that's crazy you do that. I was like, I couldn't think of it any other way. I think it's the best sport you could possibly do, but
I love it. Yeah. If you can get to the point where you can pull 100 kilos barefoot, cold, like that's Klokov style right there.
Oh man, Klokov. I wish I was on that level.
And
maybe I'll do this podcast. I'll try it out. Don't send it to you after I get hurt. Tell my wife to blame you for it.
Don't put that evil on me. Hey, but that's a great like what you talked about with them seeing that buy-in and seeing you kind of get down in the trenches. And even if it's not your athletes, if it's the other ones in your physical education class, like to see the proficiency that you have, that immediately builds buy-in with them. And it's from all the experience and all the time that you've spent under the bar that really helps solidify that. And that only comes with time. And I think that probably helps them too, because a lot of times people come in that are on the fence about training or don't really like see the benefit or forced to be put in a class by their counselor. Like it's nice to see that the person at least leading knows what the hell they're doing and that there's going to be some progress going forward and that you can build some confidence because we're going to slowly chip away at it.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it catches them off guard, no doubt. Even whenever I bring in the teams, because typically, like, if you have a 30-minute lift, there's no time to do a brief. There's no time to talk about expectations, And the way it works now, it's like if you have a big team, you let them come in during their free periods. So you let them come in during like third, fourth period leading into your lunch. So there's no time to do briefs, But when I can bring them in during off-season times where they aren't in lunchtime lifts or more after school lifts, you can bring them in, you can show them exactly what you want. And I like, man, I wail on barbells, empty barbells, I load it up, it doesn't matter. But I mean, it catches them off guard to see how hard I go into a lift, And I take great pride in that. I take great pride in being an aggressive demo guy, but they buy into that stuff, even whenever like martial arts, I did a hip toss the other day, and the mids were just sort of like, I mean, it's 6th period on a Tuesday. The 6th period is the last period of the day. They're all checked out, but I'm making them do all these different moves, leg sweeps and stuff that's on the curriculum. And I do this hip toss and it catches everyone's eye. Like, whoa, I'm like throwing my other instructor onto the deck. And I'm like, I'm sorry, Adon. Like, I'm so sorry. That's the assistant instructor. Like, I'm so sorry I have to do this, man. Like, but you got to take one for the team. Luckily, he's really good with his break falls that he just sort of like, collapses onto the ground. But just seeing how fluid it was for them, they were just like, whoa. And I mean, I'm not going to lie. I'm not the best hip toss guy in the world, So for them to be like, whoa, I was actually really proud of myself. You know what I mean? But I think those things get them bought in when you do it right. And it shows like you've been trying it and you've been, continuously trying to work that technique, even if it is, a counter to a headlock. Or, sometimes I'm at home and I'm like trying to tell my wife, like, just put me in a bear hug. And she's like, she's like 5'2", 110 pounds, she's trying to put me in a bear hug. I'm like trying to get out of it just to go over the technique so I can do it right for class. There's a lot of pressure being a lead instructor, especially if you try to hold yourself to some kind of high standard. There comes a lot of pressure, those combatives classes and stuff. So
yeah, it's great to see you still have like that passion and everything for it, because you are still kind of learning on the fly, because like you didn't box and do jujitsu and all these things growing up. So in addition, like you're still learning, just like all the plebes that you're working with are learning new concepts and stuff. So
I'm telling you, like I have the McMap manual. I had to bind it up. I'm like going through it, highlighting and looking at it, making sure I know exactly the right steps. And even in boxing, I'm watching like beginner YouTube videos to make sure I know exactly what a beginner probably should know, because Coach McNally, like great boxing coach, his level of knowledge is just so vast and high that I can hardly comprehend sometimes. I'm like, I can't look like him, So, I mean, being 240 pounds bouncing around like a 180 guy or 100-pound guy, like there's no way, I'd be too exhausted, So I try to give the beginners, the plebes, like try to dumb it down as much as possible, like find what works for you and do it. If catching a jab works for you better than slipping it, then get better at catching the jab. If blocking the cross, if blocking the cross is better than slipping the cross, then block the cross. And that's what I tell them. Like sometimes you see people change their foot stance and they change their power hand. I'm like, what are you doing? And they're freaking out. They're just trying to find a way to punch the other person in the face. And it's like, no, just what's your power hand. If your right hand's your power hand, don't switch your feet. Just find a different angle. And that's just why I try to just preach to them over and over again. Like, do the basics, just try to get better at it. What works for you may not work for me, but just get better at it for you, and you're going to be a better fighter. So
there you go.
It is interesting.
Yeah, it's cool, but I mean, it's just constant, continual education for yourself and trying to find ways to improve.
It really is. Like I'm telling you, I tell my wife whenever I have two boys, even my daughter, I'd love for them to get into jiu-jitsu, because I would immediately I would join whatever club they're at. And I don't even care if I get choked out 1,000,000 times. Like it looks like a lot of fun. Is it challenging? It looks exhausting too. But it's something that I definitely would like to look into down the road, and I don't know, hopefully I can coerce my kids to buy into it. I think they would enjoy it, but we'll see.
I think so. That was I started getting into it for a few months before the pandemic hit. So it was definitely humbling. My wrestlers kind of turned me on to it because they were beating the hell out of me in the mat room. And I was like, I mean, if they can beat me up in there, it's like, just teach me some chokes so I can like hold my own. But it's definitely, it's fun. And if you've never done it growing up, to get in those positions and learn those things, you got to have some humility, because you're going to get choked out by a 10-year-old girl if you do something wrong. And it's fun. It's fun to learn those things and just be a white belt, be a noob all over again.
No, I think it's great, and it's part of the process. You got to start somewhere. And no, I mean, even now, like just seeing reps of people rolling, and seeing the opportunities that they're missing, and I probably would miss them too, to be completely honest, because I don't know what it's like to just continuously roll around like that. But I'm like, man, they're in the guard, like get out of the guard. They're in the side mount, like, oh, you can get into the mount, like get into the mount, But I do think in a way, being able to see so many reps, I would be able to at least try to assess the positions that I'm in, probably get choked out while I'm assessing these positions, but at least I'll try to process it a little faster. But you're right. I mean, that's awesome that you got into it,
Yeah, it's been fun. I got to get back, as California's a little bit tighter with restrictions. So I've already gone through COVID and quarantine a few times. So I'm going to put that on the back burner for now. But Hey, so I know, like me, you kind of grew up in a military family, and so you've kind of been immersed in the culture a little bit. And now that you are at a service academy, it's different, but to you, it's probably a little bit more familiar and it feels more like home. So even though you never like were yourself like in the service, like how do you kind of improve and kind of find ways to relate to all the plebes and all the midshipmen, like learning the acronyms, learning the lingo, like how do you
Gosh,
kind of find ways to just like almost kind of get on their level and show that you're not a contractor or you're not just a coach?
well, I think you ask questions. You just ask questions, and you want to know more about their day, or you want to know like, hey, what do those letters mean? Like I've never seen so many acronyms in my life, and I'm just like, what does that mean? What does this mean? And I think showing some kind of care, like how was your day? How was the forestall, which is like essentially like a big meeting from a big like figurehead to talk to the brigade. What did you get from the forestall? These questions all, they come back and I think they appreciate it, because some of them they'll be like, oh, I enjoy these people. Like I wish we would have gotten more Marines to talk to us, as opposed to getting SWO. And some people are like, oh, we would really enjoy this person or that former officer. And I think I've never learned more about the military than the last 4 years I've been here. Like this place is really opened my eyes to what a military academy was. Like I can be completely honest. When I met my wife and my wife's father, he taught here at Luce during one of his tours, his short tours. We came up to the Naval Academy, and I had no idea that it was Navy, the football team, and we parked at a parking spot, and this guy who was doing tailgating is like, hey, I'm gonna have like hundreds of mids here. And my wife's like, okay, yeah, no worries. She like backs out and goes in. I was like, what did he just say to us? Oh, there's gonna be hundreds of mids there. And I was like, what the hell's a mid? What is a mid? It's like, oh my gosh, it's a midshipman, like it's short for midshipman. And I'm like, what's that? And like it was just where I'm from like rural area in North Carolina. Like, wow, I would never really know it as much as, being immersed up here. Like you grew up here, you knew exactly what a midshipman was. You knew exactly what the Naval Academy was. You see them walking around downtown in uniform. If you're at the mall, they're in uniform. But in North Carolina, my dad was enlisted in the Navy, and he served on the USS Midway. And I mean, he served for quite a bit of time, 7 or 8 years. And I would say like, wish I would have known a little bit more about the Naval Academy, because this is actually a really good opportunity. But from connecting to them, I think a lot of it's just like caring enough to ask, and if you ask, I think they're more apt to like tell you what's going on, because there's just so much going on here that I really don't know. Like even in 4 years here, I'm still learning something new. And man, first year I was like confused. I was like, what is this place? Like I would always ask my old coworker Alex, saying like, what is this place? What's going on? What's the forestall? What's going on here? And he would sit down. He'd been here for a while, so he would just like, sort of walk me through it. And my other coworker, who's in this weight room, Rhett Warren, he's been here for like nearly 20 years. So this guy, golly, this guy knows the Naval Academy. He knows a lot of stuff that deals with the military, like even like TBS to budge training, all that stuff, and I'm just sit here and talk to him about it. And I mean, I learned something new every day about this place, so I mean, there's a lot to learn though. That's for sure.
That's great. Yeah, it's cool to hear that, and I miss that atmosphere for sure. And my dad worked on the yard too for a few years as a company commander, and it was definitely a cool experience. And I've been immersed in like that military culture forever, just moving around and stuff. And it's definitely that first time you kind of get involved in it, it's overwhelming. And I forget acronyms all the time, like stuff changes all the time, but it's definitely a unique, like once in a lifetime kind of place for sure.
Couldn't say it any better myself.
Hey, so like any good training session, we end this thing off with a finisher. and we'll do it maskless, no conditioning for you and me, because
I need it. I'm out of shape.
I'm in that same boat. So, hey, so you could take as long as you want. You can answer these questions as fast as you want to, but we got 4 quarters, 4 questions, and overtime to finish us off. You ready?
Yeah.
All right, let's do it. Hey, so biggest influence in strength and conditioning and biggest influence in weightlifting.
Oh, wow. Biggest influence in strength conditioning. That's a deep one. I mean, whenever Sean Foster went to American, brought Alex Lee, I think that brought a lot of things to light. I think Alex is like a really smart dude. Like he's just really up there. Like there's a lot going on up there. You know what I mean? He's definitely influenced me. And I think me working with him for 2 years here and hearing some of his thought processes and the training process and stuff, like it really resonated with me. I think he's influenced me a lot, a ton. What was the other one? Coaching or what? Weightlifting?
Yeah, weightlifting.
Weightlifting. Wow. Glenn Penlay, I think, Cal Strength. That was obviously something that's always been like something that drew me into it, because it was that was a craze with the YouTube videos and everything. In terms of weightlifting, I mean, honestly, I look at everybody, look up to everybody, even from the national level lifters. I follow them all. But when it comes to weightlifting in general, probably a lot of it came back to like Glenn Penlay, whenever he would have his weekly cycles, and then you would finish off with the Max Out Friday. Like I just still remember those days at Georgetown where we would do a Max Out Friday, and it wasn't the best technique, but it was a lot of fun. I mean, even now, over time, even weightlifting to some extent was probably going to be like Max Ada to what he's doing at Juggernaut. Like, I think he's doing a great job there. But those are 2 people that I probably rely on a little bit more than others.
Right on. Hey, so when you're not coaching or training, what can you be found doing? What are some of Tolzman's go-to hobbies?
Oh, man. When I'm not training, I mean, that'd probably be one of my favorite things to do, but being with my family, I mean, that's the number one thing, like being with my wife and my kids. Like I've never been more fulfilled in my life until I was a father, and being with my kids, playing with them, tickling them, chasing them around. They got some boxing gloves, trying to teach them a little bit of boxing. That's what really drives me. I think that's the great thing about this place is that you can be a dad in this field at the Naval Academy. And that's why I feel like this is a dream job, and you might not get as many coaching hours, but I do think in a lot of ways you can get a lot of parent hours in there, and I think that's something that, like, when you look down the road and you see your kids are growing up, I think I'm going to be so proud that I made the decision, to be at the Naval Academy, especially during these times. Because even now, like, this job allows my wife to be at home and, and she's watching, she's taking care of them. Even though that's like by far the hardest job in the world. I don't know how she does it. God bless her for it. I think it's something nice that any wife or mother can do, is watch their kids grow up before they go to kindergarten. You know what I mean? Instead of just going straight back into work. So it's this place has been definitely a blessing. But I would definitely say, like, number one thing that we're going to do is probably that you can probably see me do when I'm not here. It's probably being with my family and just hanging out, being low key. You know me. I'm not too crazy or high maintenance.
There you go. Hey, so if you've given it some thought, if you weren't coaching in strength conditioning, what do you think you would be doing? And if you had to pick a different sport and it wasn't weightlifting, what sport do you think you'd pick?
If I wasn't a coach, that's a great question. I always thought I could be a cook. Like, I could be a chef, go to culinary school. Like, I enjoy cooking. I enjoy hosting. Like, my family, my in-laws and stuff who are local. Like, I enjoy cooking for them. I love cooking for my wife. Just seeing the joy that, like, it's essentially like weightlifting. You do all this training and then you go to a meet. Hopefully you don't bomb out, but you do pretty well. Hopefully you PR. Cooking's the same way. You put all this time and effort into making sure that the dish is gonna come out completely like perfect. And you give, like, I give it to my wife and she's like, man, wow, what is this? You know? And that's whenever I'm like, oh man, I could be a cook. But I heard cooks have like terrible schedules. You know, I heard they have a terrible schedule. So maybe I could be a cook, but I like to think that I could. I think welding or some kind of like trade school, I think that would be a cool job, you know? I don't know. I mean, I thought about that a million times. And not to say like strength conditioning is not my passion. Like, I love this job, you know, but sometimes I'll look around like, man, that's not a bad job, you know? So I think I could try to be a chef. I don't think I could be in Hell's Kitchen with like Gordon Ramsay or anything, but, you know, throw me into a TGI Fridays and I can definitely heat up some frozen goods and put them on a platter and give it to somebody. Just kidding. I love cooking and I love TGI Fridays too.
Well, they're not a sponsor. Don't worry. Hey, but if it wasn't weightlifting, well, what sport do you think you'd be? I know you didn't want to be a power lifter that much. But...
Oh man, well, it definitely wouldn't be any extreme sports because I just don't have enough, you know, cojones for that. I would say probably stick with some kind of strength sport, you know, powerlifting or even strongman. I think strongman, you guys are crazy though. You know, you strongman guys are crazy. I think it looks like a lot of fun, but I always go back to whenever Mark Philippi, like I asked him, like, what kind of advice would you give to somebody getting into strongman? He looked at me and he smiled and goes, don't get into it. You know? I think that's because his body's been wrecked, you know, but I would say it would probably have to be like powerlifting or something.
I gotcha. Hey, so this one goes hand in hand with your maybe secondary career going down the line. So if you had to set up an ideal training day, what's your go-to training music or PR song? And what's your go-to Tolzman chef inspired training meal?
Training meal?
Yeah, what's that post meal look like?
Gosh, that's a great question. I've never even thought of this. This is one hell of a finisher. Even song now, like sometimes I just lift in complete silence. Like, who am I now? You know what I mean? Like, what is going on with me? Sometimes I'm listening to the Steel Drivers, which is like Chris Stapleton's bluegrass band that he started in. So I'm like listening to like some twangy like country music. I mean, obviously, like if I'm maxing out, it's probably gonna have to be some like pretty upbeat EDM or something. If it has to be rap, then whatever. Like nowadays, it's just like I'm so focused on what I need to get done. But if I can hear like a good beat, it doesn't really matter in terms of the song. I know that's sort of lackluster. Even the meal, like what would I have? I mean, I would definitely have a steak, a big ribeye, probably medium rare. It's got to come with a salad to start off with. Appetizer, definitely some beers. That's definitely got to be at least a couple, you know, just to celebrate all the PRs that I did at that max out session. But I would probably say with like a mashed potatoes, something simple, you know what I mean? Even fries, I don't care. But the steak is what's going to be the big thing, you know? That's what's going to make the difference, is that steak with the beer. Whew, man, now I'm hungry. Not going to lie.
No. Hey, you're just a North Carolina country boy.
I wouldn't even say that. You know what's funny? Like, I didn't even really start listening to country until I met my wife. You know, she was into country. And I'm like, I'm going to start listening to country. I want to see what this is all about. And I was so confused that she liked country because she's from Maryland. You know, so for me, I'm like, oh, she's from Maryland. She probably likes pop music. You know, maybe she doesn't listen to country. Why would she listen to something Southern, you know? But sure enough, she was more country than me. I mean, my mom's Filipino, my dad's from Minnesota. They listened to zero country. I think I grew up on like Aerosmith, Van Halen. My mom oddly likes Metallica, which I think is pretty funny. You know, I don't know how she got into that, but like we never grew up with country, you know? So whenever I met her, I'm like, oh my God, I got to go to a Toby Keith concert. Like, but I actually ended up liking a lot. And now look at me now. Changed,
look at you go. Hey, so the last one I got for you for overtime, most valuable piece of advice you've received. Doesn't have to be coaching related.
Man. Most valuable advice. I mean, even though it wasn't like actually said to me, I think hard work pays off. My mom and dad, my mom's worked manual labor job. She just retired after her bout with COVID. So, and my dad, he worked up the ladder at Haynes Brands in Winston, got laid off, took another job, didn't complain about it, and just did what he had to do to pay the bills. And I have a lot of respect with that, like my mom, like I worked with my mom during summer times, and it was a Haynes Brands plant. It had zero air conditioning. I think our lunchtime was extended to 20 minutes. Typically we would have 5-minute breaks, but since it was hot, they gave us 10-minute breaks. I think 2 10-minute breaks. So overall, in like an 8-hour day, you're going to rest like 40 minutes total. But like watching her work, man, it like almost brought me to tears, because it's like, this woman has been doing this my entire life. I had no idea. It put a lot of things in perspective for me. And I think those two in general just showed me exactly what I needed, because I mean, I'm the baby of the family. Everything was given to me in a way. I didn't have to work for everything, but I think I grew up a little bit in college, especially at the end, not necessarily the first 4 years. It's probably that 5th year that I really grew up and saw an aha moment where it had an epiphany. But I think for them, hard work pays off. Things are going to suck. Just be patient, but regardless, work hard, and I think things will work out for you. So for me, hard work pays off.
No, that's great advice. And yeah, that 5th year is the sweet spot for sure.
Yeah. I mean, I'm not going to lie. Like, my brother left, my girlfriend, who's now my wife, left. I'm sitting with my roommates, and I'm like, they're playing like video games. They're drinking a 6 or 12 pack, and I'll just look around. I'm like, what am I doing here? Like, why am I still here? Like, what happened to me? So I like immediately, and I mean, when you're young, you do some dumb stuff, some stuff you probably regret or you wish you would have done different. But I would say, yeah, that 5th year, it's just it hits you different. You know what I mean? Just hits you a little differently.
There you go. Hey, so how can people follow you, kind of get a hold of you if they've got any more questions, well, weightlifting related, any of the topics we touched today, or even like some of your experience, like through your career and then even working the service academy?
They can reach me. I mean, I have social media. I'm not very present on it, but I have an Instagram account. I think it's C Tolzman. And I want to say the same thing with my Twitter account. Email, you can always email me, Tolzman, TOLZMAN @usna.edu. And I'd be more than happy to help out. Like, if I send my terrible weightlifting program or my, sports teams programs, and I can always talk training with whoever, like, it's something I've always enjoyed. Like, I'm a big talker. So those are the 2 ways or 3 ways you could probably get to me, honestly. Like, don't even do Facebook. Like, I ain't even on that anymore. I should probably delete it, but part of me thinks that since I was an OG, whenever Facebook started, maybe I should keep it around, but they're probably running analytics on me anyway, so maybe I should delete it, honestly.
Yeah, it doesn't matter at this point. You're locked in.
That's true. That is true. I know exactly what I'm doing right now.
Hey, well, Tolz, I can't thank you enough for coming on today, man. It's been great to catch up and talk a little bit and hear a little bit more about your experience there and see what you got going on. So I thank you for coming and on today, man, and taking some time.
Absolutely, dude. Thank you so much for inviting me on, and it was flattering to be invited to a podcast, because I've listened to so many podcasts, especially whenever I was commuting from Annapolis into Georgetown into DC. Like, that commute sometimes would be like 2 hours in and 2 hours out. And I would get through so many podcasts and so much dip. Oh my gosh. And then I was like, man, one day maybe that'd be cool to do a podcast. And then you actually asked me, and I'm like, oh my gosh, like, I don't even know I don't even know if I can do this, but I really appreciate it. It's been awesome. It really has.
Yeah. I'm glad to have you on, man. I know those commutes, and always got to get to your destination before the dip starts hitting, for sure.
Yeah, by that time, the buzz doesn't hit me nearly as much. But I mean, luckily, to my dismay, I quit, which now I have to be considered a quitter for the rest of my life, But I quit dipping whenever we had Luke. My wife was like, "You got to stop." And now, I think a part of me died because I really enjoy a good dip,
Hey, hey, I'm glad you got to come on today, and the honor's all mine having you on today. It's been great to chat, man, and now you get to listen to one that's got you on it.
Oh man, it's gonna be weird. It's gonna be like whenever you hear your voice on your voicemail, you're like, "Oh my god, I sound like that." But yeah,
I'm still not used to it.
I bet.
Hey man. Hey, can't thank you again. All right, man. I'll talk to you later, bud.
Sounds good, man. Take care.
See ya.
Yeah.
That's it for this episode of The Strength Game. Thank you again to this week's guest and to our sponsors, Cerberus Strength. Be sure to connect and keep up with our guests at the links in the description below. Remember to subscribe to us on Apple and Google Podcasts, Spotify, or your favorite podcast provider to stay up to date on all future episodes. Also, check us out on YouTube and CoachO'Brien.com, where you can find all the video versions of these episodes, as well as show notes, episode schedule, and much more. Comments, ratings, and reviews are always welcome and appreciated. Thanks again for tuning in, and be sure to join us next week for another great episode of The Strength Game.